Right, it's okay. I think I start. All right, well, welcome everybody. We've got Olivier speaking to us today about the events in France. You know, after Macron, there's been an increase in all sorts of industrial activity and you know various demands, and a lot of activity on the street. So, sorry, Olivier's going to speak to us about. Olivia, how long would you like to speak before I give you? If you tell me, then I'll give you a nudge just before your time is up.
Between 10 and 15 minutes.
Right, shall I tell you after 12? Would that be okay? And then you can do whatever you want.
But bear in mind, it's going to be translated.
Oh, right, yes. Who's translating?
I translate right. all my speech, so it's not a problem of translation.
Right, hang on.
I
So,
will be
Olivier,
reading my paper. So,
sorry, Olivier, are you speaking in French or English?
English.
You're speaking in English, right? That's okay. We're sorted then. So I'll give you a nudge after you've been going for 12 minutes. Then you'll have some idea, you know, where your time is. So do you want to make a start?
Okay. Here we go. So, in introduction, I would like to first moderate the remarks on the announcement of this meeting. There was no general strike called on 29th of September or on 27th of October. There could have been a real general strike on 18th October if, and we will discuss this condition. We, in the editorial board of Pelut-Soc, we think that the Mélenchon's demonstration on 16th of October was not so much helpful for going towards a general strike because it had no political objective to target Macron and throw him away. The number proclaimed by France Insoumise of 140,000 people in Paris demo is a fraud. There were about 70,000 of demonstrators. A demonstration made of militants of all people and not by the large masses. There is indeed a real effervescence marked by the consequences of Macron's policy in favor of the rich. There is a high social polarization between the classes, which has not ceased to be expressed since the spring of 2018. In that spring, there were a wave of strikes throughout France by women employees in the hospices for elder people, among one of the most socially useful strata of working people, and at the same time, the most mistreated strata. Then we have the wave of the yellow vest in November, December 2018, which lasted for almost 6 months, a wave who seriously rocked the boat of Macron regime. Then we had the push forward the general strike from the successful strike for the defense of pensions on December 5 of 2019. That day was a day of real general strike by number of strikers, by number of sectors involved, by the nature of the demonstration in the streets. The strike started from an initial call from the rank and file militants and union locals. Among the workers of RATP is a metro and buses in Paris, and the SNCF, the National Railway, who, after 2 months of political preparation, obliged the official main top union leadership to call. Then it continued by numerous strikes in January and February 2020, but that wave was stopped by the COVID epidemic. From the COVID crisis to now, workers from the so-called front line or first line have struggled for wages and working conditions. Hospital and medical workers, delivery workers, and all the sectors listed in the present meeting announcement. So what is the situation now in the present days? The main setting is the economic crisis and the climate crisis, and the two are linked. Where we see then the climate crisis can become a pretext to impose austerity on workers and give more gifts to capitalists. With Macron, it's Christmas every day for bosses. Currently, there are three main axes of Macron's attack on employees. First, the attack on pensions, which aims to lower pensions as the same to lower wages by putting the age of retirement at 65 instead of 62 now. Secondly, an attack on unemployment insurance, which aims to force the unemployed people to take underpaid jobs under the constraint of being removed from unemployment benefit. And then on the third front, an attack on the vocational high schools, which targets a third of educated youth to deliver cheap labor to the bosses and destroy public vocational education and ensure the employers hold on employees cheap. Macron is personally directing this last reform over the head of the Minister of Education, who is just acting as a puppet in this affair. With the international crisis after the beginning of war in Ukraine, we see a return of inflation with higher price on food and first necessity products and on all the energy products like oil, electricity, gas, and so on. So the first issue for the workers is wages. And as we say in Appellate Soc, today the wages question is a political question. For the end of his second presidential term, Macron has only one goal: to go down in history as the one who will have lowered the wages of workers of France by imposing antisocial reforms and bad conditions for workers, but better ones for bosses. Can he succeed? He could expect the help from the trade unions leaders and the lack of a left-wing political opposition determined not to let him finish his second term. Despite these obstacles, workers are not ready to give up. I would like then to have a look on the role of the union leaders in blocking the march towards a general strike. As you know, there are two kinds of union leadership in France. First, you have those who never want to go on strike, who are always ready to negotiate and sign contracts on the boss's terms, who are voluntary stages of social partnership. First of this kind are the leaders of the CFDT, followed by the CFTC, the Christian workers, and the CGC, management workers. The slogan can be summarized as never strike, never protest, never contest. The other leaders in the union movement are the reformist leaders who sometimes have recourse to strikes, but who are above all afraid of being outside the social dialogue. Among these, we find the leader of the CGT of FO, Force Ouvrière, and of the FSI, the main teachers union with a big federation. These three unions with Sud Solidaire are the core of militantship in French working class with socially and politically experienced members. But leaders never go as far as the members would like. You can find also the UNSA, National Union of Autonomous Union, federations who falls between the two above categories. It is a righted split from Force Ouvrière in the 90s. And also you find Sud Solidaire with a kind of left-wing leftist spur for the second category listed above, with an anarcho-syndicalist or revolutionary syndicalist background. The call for the strike on 29 September was just what we call in France journée d'action, a day of action, which most often remain unanswered. It works like religious services. On Sunday, you go to mass. In the fall, every fall after summer holidays, there is always such a day of action. Even if, depending on the context, there may be support among the workers, these days of action are not designed as preparatory stages leading to a real general strike. It's a way to pretend to show your muscle, but mostly on a hold me back or I will make a mess mode. It is the moment when dispersed struggle are brought together for one day and then called the day after to remain dispersed. Two anecdotal facts illustrate the state of minds of the leaders of CGT in the present day. First, you have the exclusion of the CGT, of the local union of the CGT in the group, the PSA Stellantis, with one of the main car builders in France. It's a local union in Poissy, in the Paris suburb, in the greater Paris. It's a local union in a factory with a very combative tradition, led by militants of Lutte Ouvrière, who are facing straight bosses and who is on the way to be excluded from the CGT because the leaders of the Metal Worker Federation do not want serious people who are effectively leading tough struggle, especially at a time when the climate crisis will affect the entire car industry with potentially tens of thousands of layoffs. Second anecdote is Martinez's end of career dream. In an interview with the newspaper Liberation in September, Philippe Martinez, who is the General Secretary of the CGT, raised the possibility after the end of his term as secretary next term with the coming Congress of becoming the social advisor of the CEO of the Renault Group, from where he was working before being a full-timer for the National Federation. So to be the social advisor for his last 2 years before retirement. It's unbelievable reformist naivety to act like Robert Redford in the movie The Man Who Talked into the Horse's Ears, as if it could be. In the CGT, there are a current of Stalinist tradition who pretend to be more class struggle in the wake of the Greek Greek Communist Party and its trade union front, the PAME.
12 minutes, Olivier.
Okay, I nearly finished. But during the strike of the old industry, the Chemical Workers Federation, affiliated to that tradition, and that federation who is organizing that sector, did not act for creating the conditions for a general strike out of the sole working sector. They let the strike taking its place, but doing things in their corner, not with someone to extend it, really in all the chemical industry out of oil refineries only, and then in all industrial sectors. When the strike began to be in sight in whole France because oil stations were empty and people can't drive their cars, it was 3 weeks after the beginning. It appeared like a surprise. Things may have been organized in such a way to popularize the strike, the demands, and calling other workers to join the fight for higher wages against inflation. When the government threatened the strikers with requisition by force, the pressure in the trade unions compelled the leaders to launch a joint appeal on October 18 against repression and for wage increase for all. But it was under the constraints of events, not within the framework of a consciously designed strategy. To conclude, we can compare the situation in France since 2018 with in some way, like the Italian creeping May of the years 69-70. There are two political and social issues towering over the situation: inflation and the climate crisis. And these two issues are matters of concern and survival for many millions. There is no reason to envisage peace for Macron between now and the end of his mandate. Two demands can unify all workers in the same fight: 10% now on wages and the bring back of the sliding scale of wages in face of price inflation. For memory, last word. For memory, the sliding scale in France was terminated by Mitterrand's first government in 1983, when the PS-PCF government adapted its policies to neoliberalism and the beginning of globalization in the 80s. Thank you, comrades, for your attention.
Right, thanks very much, Olivier. Who would like to come in first? Please stick your electronic hand up. Can't see any hands up at the moment. Anybody like to ask any questions? Anybody?
Yeah, this is Steve. I mean, I wanted to know, maybe you can make an assessment of the political parties in France, the left political parties, and what their intervention is in the working class. I mean, any united fronts, or how is the left, the revolutionary left or far left, organizing in France? And is there any effort to have united fronts around a general strike, around taking on the Macron and the capitalists?
Thanks, Steve. Do you want to respond to that, Olivier?
About the state of the left. So I didn't speak about it in my introduction, but the figures are bad because, as you know, firstly, Macron was elected, and the second candidate was Marine Le Pen, and there are some succeed with the election in the parliamentary election, with the success of the NUPES, with regrouping the Socialist Party, the Green Party, the Communist Party, and the Mélenchon from political. Mélenchon as not a political, it's a movement with no clear organization, and just the clique at the summit will decide anything. And so at the present stage, Mélenchon is in position force as the leadership, because he succeeded to be the third at the presidential election, but he has the greatest number of deputy MP in the left, but it's not enough, because as the Fifth Republic is working, the parliament is not as little power, because all the main decisions are taken by the presidency, and when the presidency has not the immediate majority in the parliament, they act with a mechanism which called the 49.3. It's an article in the constitution who allows the president and the leader or the prime minister acting for the president to shut up the voice of the MPs by saying, no, that's if you want we stay in power, you must accept everything we said, so you must vote for us, and it's shut up. So they froze any debate, and they froze any differentiation inside the majority of the parliament. But at the present time, the Socialist Party is making some kind of modest comeback, because all the rightists, all the social liberal went with Macron, or they are nearly outside. We'll have to see what happens at the next coming Congress. Is the present General Secretary will be able to maximize his weight against the right wingers and the people who are leaning forward Macron. We will see it, but there are some possibility to have some left comeback from the Socialist Party. the Communist Party, the main argument of the Communist Party is the strength of the social influence, like the leadership inside the most part of the CGT is under people of Communist Party. But now the Communist Party is no more a traditional centralized Stalinist organization. It's a federation of current, and when you talk with a militant of the Communist Party, you had to know which is current, is tendency, so to be able to have the discussion. And the main problem is what is Mélenchon doing, because there are many things who are not clear. It's due to his age. He will not be the next candidate for his movement, because it will be 55 or something like that. So it will be hard for him to take it. At the same time, his main successor, Adrien Quatennens, is in a personal crisis, because he is under a crisis, because is now publicly know that he hurt his wife, and it's a big mess about that. And there are some people who are saying he must resign from his responsibility inside the France Insoumise, as well to resign as MP, because you can't have mandate people with mandate who are not clear with in personal relationship with wife and family. And so there's a big debate. At the same time, the debate about that fait divers is it obliges the France Insoumise to have a clear organization with clear body who is, because the problem inside the France Insoumise is who is deciding, who has the voice to decide, and who is voting the decision. And that crisis, in that sense, is very positive, because it obliges, it hurt Mélenchon Bonapartist project, and that's a good point.
Okay, thanks, Olivier. Finn, you had your hand up next.
First of all, comrades, I want to thank Olivier for his opening contribution and for the second contribution, which is very informative. So I have a few additional questions. First of all, in relation to Marine Le Pen and Rassemblement Français, they made significant gains in the parliamentary elections following the presidential election, where of course she lost. Now, I wonder what that represents in terms of the growth of the right. She's opposed to the pension change of Mélenchon, and she may well be able to present herself as the main force to prevent Mélenchon in Parliament getting it through. Now, that's a question rather than a statement. I'm also wondering about Zemmour and his organization. And he put forward the great replacement theory as part of his right-wing campaign during the presidential elections. So I'm wondering, is he still around? And what's the perspective for the growth of such groups? The other question relates to Parliament. You referred a lot to these in your second contribution, Olivier, anyway, and thank you for that. But it's a very unstable Parliament. And even that law which enables the President and the Prime Minister to bring in stuff unilaterally, it can be reversed by parliamentary manoeuvring and parliamentary alliances. So if this means that Macron is going to lose a lot of what he wants to achieve by not being able to get it through Parliament, which force is going to gain principally from that failure of Macron? I'm wondering about I'm thinking mainly again about the right. The issue of the Socialist Party is very interesting. If it's true the Socialist Party is making gains, I'm concerned about, are they making gains in the local communities, in local organizations, in unions? Like, it's one thing to be making noise in Parliament, but is the Socialist Party realistically going to regain some status inside the working class? Now, Hollande was completely discredited, almost to the extent when the Socialist Party seemed to be about to disappear entirely. So I would have thought that that was what was facing the Socialist Party. But from what you say, Olivier, there's some life left in that. Now, given the complete betrayal and complete rejection, betrayal by Hollande and rejection of Hollande, I'm wondering what the growth or rise in support for the Socialist Party means in terms of working class communities and also within the trade unions. And just a final point, you mentioned in the trade union point, all of the main trade union groups, the CGT, the CFTT, and the third one, all of them are all grouped together in your opening comment, Olivier, as reformist and useless right-wing unions who have interest in nothing, only making concessions and agreeing to the boss's terms. And you contrasted with that, the teachers union and one or two other organizations. But there must be movement within the CFDT and the CGT by workers in transport and industry in the significant sectors of the French economy. So to group them together as a load of unions who are absolutely useless and are concerned only about considering the buses. Now, I don't know, I can't argue the case, but that seems a strange comment to make for mass organizations. Now, these organizations will be forced to reflect the feelings in French society. So I would suggest, instead of lumping them together as a group of useless so-called trade unions, I'd like to see a more deeper examination of what processes are happening or are likely to happen inside the CFDT and the CGT and so on. Now, I want to thank Olivier for his opening contributions, and I know these are questions rather than fully worked out positions, but I'm interested to hear the perspectives for Le Pen in particular, and the perspectives for the growth of opposition inside the unions and the Socialist Party points that you referred to.
Okay, thanks very much, Finn. I think maybe if we bring Carol in next, and then if nobody else has got the hand up, perhaps Olivier would like to respond to all the questions. So just to ask again, please, if you've got something to say, don't be afraid to put your hand up and say it. We've got plenty of time. I can see there's comments appearing in the chat, but there's always a danger that your important points could be missed. So please don't be afraid to, just put your hand up and make your points in the discussion. So, Carol.
Hi, I think a lot of the questions that Finbar had asked are actually thoughts that I had too, and I hope that Olivier goes into it like more deeply. But there's one of the things that Steve had asked was, is there some sort of united front of different groups who are trying to fight? I maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that you mentioned anything about the war and the impact that the war is having on the French working class, because I mean, that's certainly one of the things that's causing inflation, and the fact that people are not getting, enough heat. And I know this is the case throughout Europe, is really, upsetting people tremendously. I'm not sure if you realize this, but there's a union in Italy called Cobus, which is organizing on December 2nd and trying to get international connections against both NATO and Russia. And we're in the United States trying to build support demonstrations for Cobus. And I'm just wondering, I would like to hear more about what people's opinions are about the war and what they want to do about it and how the war is impacting them, because Europe is much more on the front line than the United States. A lot of American workers talk about the war and are upset about the fact that the United States has spent $600 billion on weapons when people are living in the streets. But it's not as connected, I think, as Europe is. And so I'd be interested to hear what European workers are saying about it, and would they be interested in participating in a this is December 2nd, and in building a united front against both US and NATO and Russia. Those are my questions.
Okay, thanks, Carol. There's no other hands up at the moment. So, Olivier, would you like to respond to those questions now?
So there are five subjects. It's inflation.
Lots of subjects.
So that one subject about the trade unions and the possibility of united fronts of the trade unions, and the question of this report between CGT and CFDT, the question of the Socialist Party comeback, the prospect about Marine Le Pen, the question of how Macron will last and how could he govern, and a question about the effect of war in France and its place in the political debate. So I will start with the question of trade unions. When we are fighting for a united front of fighting trade unions in France, the main unions we have in mind are CGT, Force Ouvrière, FSU, the teacher union, and Solidaire, the leftist union. And if we could have a solid front with that, we could do the revolution in France. We could have genocide, but because CFDT is such a pro-bosses unions. It's our right wingers. They are okay with market economy, okay with neoliberalism. It's for instance, it's very strange because during the election in the working place, CFDT is the first in front at the first place, but in fact it's empty structure. Is just people are voting, people are helping people to vote and helping the CFDT to have candidates in the professional election. But in fact, where there are real union, something who say no to bosses in everyday life, you have CGT, Force Ouvrière, FSU, Solidaire, but CFDT, it's a big empty structures. And for instance, in my workplace, the present day CFDT union in my workplace is not the same at what it was in the 80s or the 90s. At that time, it was a quite combative reformist structure. Now it's we said it, we have an expression in France, béni oui oui, somebody who you
want to try in French if you're not sure, Olivier, and we perhaps ask Bob to help us out.
Des gens qui s'écrasent tout le temps devant le... John, tu peux m'aider?
Yeah. People who prostrate themselves constantly in front of the bosses.
Voilà, c'est ça.
Yeah.
And they are always capitulating, always saying yes, boss, yes, boss. It's very hard to have action with them. It's quite impossible. So even if on the paper it's a big organization, in fact, it has no militants, no volunteer to fight, no one to fight. And so the question of trade union unity is mainly CGT, Force Ouvrière, FSU, Solidaire. And the main political question in the trade union movement, it's around that kind of unity. On the question of the possibility of a coming back of the Socialist Party, what would be the best scenario in the next coming Congress of the Socialist Party? It will be a clear split with people like Hollande or the peoples around Hollande. If they can be go away, go out, it will be the best scenario. But I don't know. We have to see what will happen in. I think it's January or February in next year. About Marine Le Pen prospect, what is good since the beginning of the parliamentary work after the election is that on all the social question, the Marine Le Pen and his MP show they are on the boss's side. They refuse to vote for for upping the minimal wage. They voted against the reinstallment of the impôt sur la fortune. L'impôt sur la fortune. The tax on the big fortune and the
wealth tax. Wealth tax.
And they voted against it. And on much of the subject, and mainly the social subject, they are clearly voting with Macron and not for the people. So it's easy in agitation to see to say, look at that people. They pretend to be on the side of the working people, but at any time they had to vote, they are not voting for the working people. So the main prospect for Le Pen is by being courted by Macron, because, for instance, in the last week, a young girl of 12 was assassinated in a horrible condition by a young Algerian woman of 21 or 22. And as soon as the news was released of that this Algerian girl was without papers for staying in France, the far right and then the right people organize a campaign for we must pull out of France all that not wanted migrants. And there are a dirty tentative of recuperation of the sorrow about the murder of that little girl. And in the next days, Darmanin, with the interior minister of police, made a statement, was nearly on the same wording as Marine Le Pen against migrants, something like saying that all the migrants are potentially criminal and so on, in a very racist manner way. And so the main possibility for Marine Le Pen is to be courted by Macron. So by that way, I go to the fifth question about the possibility of Macron to govern and to act with some kind of success. First of all, the first weaknesses of Macron is that he's just have a relative majority in the parliament. And in the Fifth Republic, the president must have absolute majority in the parliament, because if he hasn't, he can't act normally on a regular way. So the groups who is taking Macron in hostages is who can make blackmail on him are the group of the former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, with a group who split from the UMP, the right, the official right, and who accept to be the Prime Minister of Macron during the first term, and the group of François Bayrou. And François Bayrou is some reminiscence of the right, not the Gaullist right, but the right of Giscard and the Christian democracy. And it's not a big party, but they had a lot of local influences and quite a good number of local officials in the local elections. And these groups are able to put condition on Macron, saying no, okay, we're going to vote with you, but on the condition you accept what we want. And it's very complicated for the Macron party and the Macron parliamentary group, because they are just have the relative majority. And at the same time, you have a quite contradictory situation. The historical traditional Gaullist right is the UMP is being pushed on between two forces. One side is Macron, the other side is Le Pen, but at the same time they could be courted by Macron to help him to govern with unpopular law, like the law about retirement, about wages, and so on. So it's not a situation for stability. I think it will be hard to Macron to go up until the end of his term without any kind of help. About the war, I must have the obligation to first state my position about the war. I am for the victory of Ukraine and for the military defeat of Putin. And in that way, well, I am working with people who are doing solidarity work with the people of Ukraine and with the Ukrainian left who is fighting against Russian imperialism. At the present time in France, you have Macron who is regularly talking on phone with Putin. Globally, the most part of the French establishment don't want to go at war with Russia. They are, what is the main spirit in the French establishment is the historical friendship between Russia and France from the time of the Alliance Franco-Russe in 1905, when it was sealed in order to fight the revolution in Russia, the first revolution in Russia. And then the next step of the Alliance Franco-Russe was the First World War, when they were fighting together against Germany. And then you have the next step with the 1935 agreement treaty between France and Stalin Russia in order to fight Germany. And then you have the next step of the historical friendship is when De Gaulle came to power in 44, 45. And there one anecdote, when Maurice Thorez came back from Moscow to Paris in 44, Stalin went with him to the airport, and before he stepped in the plane, he said, "Okay, Maurice, no joke. De Gaulle must be in power. Don't do anything against that." Yes, and yes, comrade. And the PCF helped De Gaulle to take power and to restore the capitalist state after the liberation. And so the war is not a big issue. So Macron is not don't want to make war. Is not most pro-Russian people in France want to describe Macron as Bob un caniche. Un caniche.
You're muted, so if you translate it, we can't see you.
Je ne comprends pas le mot caniche.
Mais il y avait déjà l'expression être le caniche de Bush, et là c'est être le caniche de l'OTAN ou le caniche de Biden, le chien de compagnie.
Oh, the blind guide dog.
Yeah, something like that.
Guide dog. Okay, he's a guide dog.
So there a big part. For instance, there is a former Gaullist parliamentary who is called Thierry Mariani, who left the traditional right for the National Front, the Marine Le Pen party, who is acting like the leader of the Russian lobby in France, and he had done all the work of promoting the Assad regime during the years of the civil war in Syria, and with justifying the Russian intervention in Syria, and now they are calling. So the establishment in France is not pro-war. They would like to go back to peacetime and have business and fuck off on the Ukrainians. They are inutile people, and I'm not a fan of the action of the Sicobas in Italy, who are in a pacifist manner. I'm personally, I must be clear, I am on a perspective of being for the defeat of Russia, and so for helping Ukrainian people to win the war.
Okay, thanks, Olivier. Anybody else? No hands up at the moment. No electronic hands up anyway. Anybody? Steve.
Yeah, well, it seems like there's a disconnect. What's going on with U.S. imperialism? I don't really understand why there's not more recognition of it, but the United States is moving to go to war with Russia and China. And this inter-imperialist rivalry threatens world war. So that doesn't seem to be registered yet in France or even in Germany, which are going to be bearing the brunt of this. So the fact that I'm for the not for the victory of Putin, but for the working class in Russia to overthrow the government, the Putin government, and for the American working class to take on their government. But it seems like there's, in France, from what you're reporting, there isn't any kind of mass opposition to NATO and US imperialist intervention. The United States is, in both the Democrats and Republicans are going for militarization of Asia and surrounding Russia for a war with Russia. So I don't know, maybe you disagree with that, but it seems that is really where we're going internationally. And also the breakup of the decline of US imperialism and its relationship to European imperialists is very important, because the United States does not want the Europeans to have any relationship with China and Russia, but be completely dependent on the United States. I mean, that's what's happening in Germany now. They want Germany to cut off all trade relations with Russia and become dependent on the United States. That doesn't seem to be, even though Germany has a large, massive investment in China, over 1 million workers in Germany are dependent on Chinese investment. So it seems to me there's a disconnect or not an understanding about what's going on with US imperialism right now.
Okay, Steve. Anybody else? Ian.
Hi, I'll just have to do it without my video this time. Okay. But yeah, I had put a couple of questions in the chat that I could read out, and then also a wee comment on how the discussion's gone since. So first of all, I didn't know that this guy, I had seen about the domestic violence allegations. I didn't know he was a kind of designated successor to Mélenchon. So although I'm not the kind of person on the left to prejudge these things or guilty until proven innocent or anything like that, it's very murky. I don't think he could take up that leadership role. I think he stood down as a spokesperson. What I was wondering about was whether Daniela Bono has any chance of running for president from LFI. She's always been very impressive speaking for the People's Assembly and the Labour left. over here. So I think she'd maybe be a more worthy successor. Though I'm not sure if Mélenchon's definitely not going to run again. He'll be Bernie's age from the first run next time if Macron even makes the end of this full term, which I don't know if we can be sure about at this stage. Le Pen did say, I don't think Mélenchon said in the campaign it was definitely his last run. Maybe he did and I missed it. I did see Le Pen said it was her last campaign, but I wouldn't believe a word she says. I'm just wondering if she's sticking to that for now, or if she's already planning her next comeback. But finally, on Olivier's points on Ukraine, I think Steve's just said some things that I liked about that. But I do think there's almost a contradiction between having a good position on the trade union struggles and fighting against the energy rises, and this position of Ukrainian military victory. I think it's a reactionary utopia, really, pushed by NATO and the West. I don't think it's achievable. If they tried in NATO to really achieve it, it would be even more dangerous because of the threat of nuclear war. And I think the best deal that Ukraine could get, the most pro-Ukrainian, but also the most achievable and the most democratic, would be for a democratic peace that accepts Ukraine's right to self-determination outside Russia, obviously, but also allows the Donbass regions under UN supervision in a less sham referendum, if you like, than the ones they've already had, to decide whether to go with Ukraine or Russia. And maybe if Ukraine had agreed to become federal, like it had already said it would in the Minsk agreements, there'd be more chance for them to go with Ukraine. So, yeah, I think that the fact that Boris Johnson himself tried to scupper that kind of deal in April, pushing Zelensky to fight on to military victory, is one of the reasons we're in such an energy crisis now, even though there were structural issues building before. But yeah, I think starve and freeze for Ukraine would be, it's not even moral. And it's also not, because there are prospects of peace that the establishment have actively worked against. And it's kind of gaslighting without the gas, is how I've described it previously at a Labour fringe meeting, with Boris on his last trip to Kiev saying, well, we are paying in energy prices and you're paying in lives, but actually it'd be better if neither working class was paying in either, and it's the ruling class that are standing in the way of that. I'm not saying that Putin's got no blame in this, but for us in the West, the main enemies at home, as Steve said, I'd like Putin to be dealt with by the Russian people too, but in a way that would probably be easier if there weren't so many sanctions, making them rally around the flag to an extent as well. So our job here is with the likes of Macron and Boris Johnson, Biden and all the others. Well, it's not Boris Johnson anymore, but he played a significant role in this one. Anyway, I'll shut up because you'll probably be getting tired of seeing my non-face at this point.
Thanks very much, Ian. Anybody, I'm going to bring Finn back in. Does anybody want to speak who hasn't spoken already at this particular moment in time? No, right, Finn, over to you. You just have to unmute yourself.
I want to make an additional point about Le Pen. Le Pen poses enormous dangers for the working class across Europe. And the victory of the right in Italy, Sweden, the growth of the right in the Netherlands, the problem now in Britain, with the growth of the right, which will happen in the wake of Sunak. And I noticed last April, the Orban in Hungary won his 4th term in office and now has 2/3 of the votes in parliament. Coupled with the rise in the US, or the influence in the US of the right, and don't forget that Bannon went to France to speak at a joint meeting with Le Pen during the period of Trump's presidency. So to focus on parliamentary maneuvering in regard to Le Pen, I think is probably a mistake. The influence that Le Pen wields in France is big. We can't deny that. Now, I know it's changed from the time of Jean-Marie Le Pen, But nonetheless, the support base he had, you know, the people nostalgia for colonies, the Catholic establishment, people looking to the Vichy regime. I mean, I know a lot of these people are gone now, but these traditions are still there. And I just think the danger is huge. And we need to focus on Le Pen, not so much from the maneuverings in Parliament, but the real danger that her rise poses, her right wing, the enthusiasm that she is going to generate amongst the right in other countries of Europe is very serious. And I'd just like to hear a bit more comment on that, and maybe a bit of a less focus on her maneuverings in Parliament and more about the dangers that the rise of the right across Europe and the world, for that matter, poses. And she's part of that rise.
Thanks, Finn. Anybody else? Okay, no. Olivier, do you want to respond to the last two contributions?
Yes, about the war in Ukraine. I don't want to engage in the discussion today, because if we do it, we need the night, and it's not so it's not the main subject of today. But for instance, about the climate crisis and the energy crisis, with or without the war, the energy and climate crisis is there, and the war precipitate the question of the energy and the necessity to leave fossil energy and to go for alternatives kind of production. But so it is like that. So so if you want to know my position, I enjoy, Conrad, to read on what we are publishing in our blog on appelutsoc.org. I will put the name of our blog on the discussion side. But about the question of Le Pen, I will give you my proper experience. In my workplace, there are 1,000 workers. I am a well-known militant of the CGT. I know a lot of people. I can tell maybe 3 or 4 people about thousands of co-workers that people is voting Le Pen. But when you know that Marine Le Pen is making around 40% in the second turn of the election, I should meet that people in my workplace. But it's very strange, because I do not have the opportunity to meet open supporter of Le Pen in my everyday life, or I should go in particular milieu, not my working place. But I'm sure that there are about between 1/3 or more of my co-workers who voted for Le Pen at the second turn of the. But there's no militant. It's good. We do not face militant large group in the society, in workplace, because if it was that, it was clearly the model of the fascist party, of the Nazi party. But we did it's mainly a reactionary. The nucleus of the Le Pen movement is built upon the historical tradition of French fascism. But the party, Rassemblement National, as is its name now, is a ultra right-wing organization with parliamentary action, with the national election and local election. But in the local election, we will see what they will be able to realize in the coming local election, because it's at that time that you can judge the weight of a party with its ability to have candidates everywhere in every town and villages. And well, so the contradiction of the National Front is the abilities to transform the electoral success into a real militant force, a mass militant force. And at the present time, it is not, unfortunately. One of the main basis of the Le Pen, the National or Rassemblement National, which is now named, is the main issue is racism, and especially racism against people of North Africa, Arab background. And now it's disguised with an anti-Muslim spirit. But if you, as soon as we take militant initiative, open counterattack on each issue of racism, they are stepping back. And there are some places in France, for instance, in Lyon, there is a local tradition of violent street fighting fascist group. And sometimes they are making some raid on some quarter, but it's not like the Nazi party conquering the streets of Germany. It's not there. So it's a forces with archy reactionary, mainly based on the racist issue, and all the question is to block any kind of crystallization of the force. And for instance, as soon as they are big, for the last 40 years in France, as soon as there is a big social movement, a big wave of strikes, they are out, they are hiding in their hole. As soon as the working class is in the street, we don't see him. We don't see them. So the question is how to break any kind of transformation of the electoral success into physical forces. That's why, but I am quite, what is more we must fear is the junction between the far right and the element inside the state. For instance, now it's clear that most part of police people in France are voting for the far right in the election, in political election, and in the professional election. And for instance, in December there will be the big round of electoral election inside the civil service people, and there will be a big national vote for all the post for the elected people from the union. And in the police, there will be a coalition. It's known that there will be a coalition of all the right-wing and ultra-right-wing elements around a so-called union with named Alliance, with archy-reactionary, archy-racist, and well, very, very, very bad. And there are a coalition around that who is going to want officially and openly to smash the elected position of force ouvrière inside the police. And force ouvrière inside the police is not the more left-wing part of force ouvrière. It is a very right-wing inside force ouvrière. So what will be very dangerous is the merging of the electoral forces of the National Front and position inside the states, and especially inside the repressive corps like army and police. That's what is very dangerous. But from Now, France is a multiracial society with big minorities of people coming from Arab background, from sub-Saharan Africa, from Asia, from, so you can't have a successful racist force against the reality, the social reality of what is society now. It's only could lead to physical clashes.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else? Maddie.
What you've said now reminds me, I think it was in 2018 when the French won the World Rugby Cup. South African comedian in the United States, Trevor Noah, made a joke about how the African team had won the Rugby Cup. And he was hauled over the coals by officials in France saying, no, these men are all French. Though, of course, they were not. Their origins were North African, the very people you are talking about now. Now, I find it a bit confusing that there's a contradiction between the people who are representing France, who are obviously not of white French origin, and the kind of pride that you find in sports circles in our team won. Do you follow my argument or my reasoning? And one of the things in Sweden that actually has helped to allay some of the racism has been the successful sports people of first or second generation immigrants who by being immigrants, by having foreign names, looking foreign, they actually diffuse a certain amount of racism. So my question to you is, does that kind of thing work in France as well? That sports people who represent the country of foreign origin diffuse a certain amount of the racism.
Okay, thanks, Maddie. Roger.
Yeah, Conrad, I think one of the things about our discussions is they're very democratic discussions and open discussions, and comrades all get their say. And as a result, it often leads to away from the original topic and to other burning issues of the day. And I think that's happened with this one, of course, too, and that's all to the good. And the two discussions, two topics that I think we should return to in the near future. We have had meetings on them before, but I think they're very much alive still. One is the threat of reaction around the world, which has been touched on in the discussion about the threat posed by Le Pen, and of course on the Ukraine war. And I don't want to, I don't want to start off new discussions on those topics, except since other comrades have made points, I'd like to, just in passing, express them. One is about this wave of reaction. Now, we already had the horrible threat of extreme right-wing or very far-right regimes in Hungary, in Poland, in Brazil, which of course could change today, in India, the Philippines. We see that almost unbelievable that there's been a return to power of somebody from the Marcos dynasty, the son of the overthrown dictator. You know, but also more recently, well, of course, the threat of a return to power of Trump, which the coming midterm elections may give us a very clear pointer about that. We've got the coming to power of the extreme reactionary coalition in Italy, led by a member of what was an openly fascist party. The same in Sweden with the Sweden Democrats, and of course the far more right-wing Tory governments that we're getting now, in rather quick succession, of course, but in Britain. Now, all of this, the one thing we have to keep in mind, or one of the things we have to keep in mind to keep a sense of proportion about it, is that every one of these regimes has a parliamentary base and not a mass fighting force, as Olivier pointed out, on the streets. Every single one of them, and they also are, you know, are subject to removal by the same means, as we saw with Trump, as we're likely to see, I hope, in Brazil today, and so on. But in this period that's opening up, I don't think we cannot be complacent about that. I mean, I know I take Olivier's point that there is such a mixed population in France, but what about the mixed population in Sweden? Come to that. Nevertheless, the threat is there because of the coming to power of the Sweden Democrats, and in France too. Yes, it's very mixed population and so on, and there's a very large minority of Arab origin. But you know, there was a very large Jewish population in Germany. I mean, things could change in the period that's opening up of turmoil and quite possibly social and economic catastrophe. Who knows that what's so far simply an electoral force couldn't become a real fighting force or give rise to a real fighting force on the streets. So I think that's something we have to return to. I hope we in the next few weeks we can have another discussion on that. And that, of course, partly will arise from a discussion next week, which will be on the situation in Brazil following the presidential election, which is taking place today. The other thing is about Ukraine. I mean, we've had discussions on that, but I think we should definitely have a new one soon. Since Olivier has put his position on that, I would like to repeat simply from the question of the programme. I think that we should support the following demands. One, Russia hands off Ukraine, immediate withdrawal of the occupation forces. Self-determination for the peoples of Donbass and Crimea on the basis of a genuinely democratic referendum. No support for NATO or the EU or the Western powers. No trust in the Zelensky government. Full solidarity with the people of Ukraine in defense of their democratic rights. I think we have to have a position of supporting neither side in what has been admitted by American politicians to be a proxy war. In so many words, a former CIA director has said that we are fighting a proxy war against Russia, starting with Ukraine. And you know, we have to see it in the geopolitical context, and not just from the point of view of the local manifestation. I think we have to have a position like socialists had in the First World War of support for neither side. Of course, support for the rights, the democratic rights of the Ukrainian people, and that means fighting off the brutal attack, imperialist attack, I would say, by the minor imperialist power of Russia. But nevertheless, there's nothing whatsoever progressive about their actions. But at the same time, it's got to be, we have to base ourselves on the movement and the fight of the working class of Ukraine and of Russia, and that's a socialist internationalist position without any support for the politicians of NATO who are exploiting the situation for their own interests. So I hope that's another debate that we'll have soon.
Thanks, Roger. Bob.
Thanks, comrades. When we're looking in detail at the political developments in a particular country, at first sight, things are very confused and different. But I think it's important to draw some lessons out. Olivier has described the state of the political representatives of the bourgeoisie in France in terms of really shows them to be in a terrible crisis. And it's not unlike the politicians of the bourgeoisie in Britain. We've seen them acting out their crisis in the most outstanding manner for the last 6 months. But we have to derive the causes of those developments in international changes. And I think the basic international change is the end of what economists have called the Great Easement, which is a nice economic term, which sounds all very nice and everybody got on very well for 50 years. What was involved was that a very reactionary American government got together with a very reactionary Chinese government and whatever they could get from quite a reactionary Russian government to get an end to the Vietnam War and various movements that were disturbing them in the West. The upshot of that, if you remember the famous visits by Reagan to Peking, meeting Mao and so forth, for decades and decades, the Chinese working class has been providing cheap labor for Western economies. And in the process, of course, oddly enough, China has become a major imperialist power. That's an inevitable, this is all part of the development of imperialism as described by Lenin. And we've reached the point where their imperialist rivalry with the United States and Europe has reached boiling point, and it's a very, very dangerous point. Now, I don't think we can look at this through the lens that Stalinism taught to look at world relations through. Russia is a candidate imperialist power. China is quite a developed imperialist power now, with certainly developing all her trade and commercial relations right through the world. This gives rise to rivalry. They will like to beat the bleeding shit out of each other. And they will use workers to do that. Now I hear calls for workers' solidarity in this. With what bricks will you build that workers' solidarity? What straw will be in those bricks? You know, you build solidarity on a firm, practical basis. That's why I think, and I recommended in the chat, that we pay some attention to what the Bolsheviks were saying about war in 1917, not the famous easy quotes that the main enemy is at home, not the famous easy quotes that can sit easily with bourgeois pacifism, but the very difficult quotes about what are the real world relations that I recommended that you looked at Lenin's pamphlet on socialism in war, because he raises all these questions. Now, the difference is, of course, Lenin knew that there was a revolutionary movement bubbling up. That's what we can't prove at the moment. We might be seeing the very first beginnings of it, but you know, there's a tremendous job of rebuilding the world working class. Just one little point. The mass movements in Britain now, Enough is Enough, has at its heart the railway workers, the London Underground, and the bus workers. And lo and behold, what was at the heart of the major successful general strike in France was the RATP and the SNCF. There's not a cigarette paper between the two, and yet we've seen no move to unite their struggles. To me, that's the sort of ground that we have to work on, because they're very promising movements. I have to say, the movements in the UK are very promising, but also very disturbing. Finbar started us up, was it Finbar? Pointed out that that this right-wing swine that ran the UKIP party is rubbing his hands now. We do have to worry about that, but you know, we must look for a genuine rebirth of internationalism in working class struggle. It won't be even, it won't be easy, and we have to have an awareness of where workers are at and how they relate to their organizations. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Bob, and then Carol.
I agree wholeheartedly with Bob, except for the fact that it wasn't Reagan, it was Nixon in 1972. But I have to say that now that Olivier's position is becoming clearer, because I didn't really understand it initially, on fascism, it really frightens me that we have to learn from history. I mean, you know, bourgeois democracy fell apart before World War II, and we ended up in a conflagration that killed, you know, 70 million people. Bourgeois democracy is in even bigger trouble now than it was in 1939 or before 39. And we have to be telling people that the people that paid Hitler was a nobody. In 1923, when he was arrested for the putsch, people thought, well, this is the end of this guy, because, you know, he's in jail, he'll go retire, nobody's going to hear from him again. And then the capitalists paid him because capitalism was falling apart. The capitalists needed him to keep the workers in line. And, you know, in terms of having a large minority community, I don't think there's any place in the world that has more than in the United States. And yet the fascists were on the Capitol steps talking about Jews, talking about Blacks. I mean, they are murderous. They murder Black people and Jews and Hispanics all the time. So to say that, well, you know, we can, you know, not worry because we can have the parliament on our side, I think is, you know, really misleading people, because, you know, bourgeois democracy is good in the good times and not good in the bad times. And these are bad times. The world, as the way that Bob described China and the United States and the rivalry, that the anti-Asian sentiment in the United States is really extreme. Asian people are being murdered all the time on a daily basis here in the United States. I don't think because we have pluralism and we have people who are out there saying this is a bad thing, or that we have a Congress. I think that the working class has to organize in a united front against the fascists. So when the fascists come to demonstrations, which they do, we have to come to demonstrations and we have to be prepared to take them on. to think that somehow the bourgeois parliament, bourgeois Congress, or whatever is going to resolve this, I think is really going to disarm the working class. And I think, you know, that what we have to be saying to people is that these people are serious. They're paid by the bourgeoisie to repress all dissidents, to repress the working class, to get as much profit as they possibly can. And that this is the end of the line for capitalism. You know, it's the environment, as you mentioned, is a major thing, but it's really the end of the line. So they are going to hang on as tenaciously as they possibly can. What are we going to do? What's our program as the working class? How do we want to fight them? How do we want to get into a united front? Are we calling for, what is the program of not only your organization, Olivier, but I think it's not a good thing to tell people that they don't have to worry about it because there's a large minority community of Arabs. And I mean, Arabs have been, I forget what year it was, but there was a demonstration of Algerians and the police, it was early 70s, I think, late 60s. What year was it? 50s?
1950s or 60s.
1950s and 60s, where they threw 200 people, 200 Arabs into the Seine. I mean, it didn't help that they had a big community. So I think that this is a terrible mistake on your part, and I think that it's time to reassess it. That's it.
Carol, anybody else before I bring Olivier back in? Just one question I'd like you to take up, Olivier, is how active are the youth in movements in France? Because I think that's the indicator to the future, what the youth are doing. I just wonder if you could say something about that at some point in your response. If there's no more hands up, Olivier, if you'd like to respond now.
I would like to, I will mainly answer about the question of fascism and the danger. I never said there were no danger in France. For instance, when you are evocating the massacre of the 17 October 1961 by the French police, of nearly 200 people were killed by French police, and about many thousand were injured. There is since the victory of the Algerian Revolution, when the Algeria get its independence after a long war of liberation, there's still a big racist tradition inside the state apparatus, inside the police, and that's a real danger, because when the police is going in the popular suburb, they are spontaneously, they are not kind with the people living there, and all the black people or the Arab people are in danger. It's the main danger. If you are black and youth in France today, is the police. So about when you are talking about Meloni and Italy, Meloni announced that she wants to make a move in the political institution of Italy, and I'm sure that Meloni has in mind something as copying what we have as constitution in France. And what is, I think, I do think that the pure religion, the more efficient tool for the bourgeoisie, especially in nowadays crisis time, it's Bonapartism. And Bonapartism is the autonomy of the state up from the society. And for instance, in the Fifth Republic regime, Macron can can have the relative majority in the parliament and continue to govern. And it's like if you were driving a car with one of your wheel is un pneu crevé, je sais pas comment on dit. Bob, tu peux m'aider?
Sorry, crash.
C'est comme conduire avec une voiture avec une roue crevée.
Oh, with a burst tire. Yeah, a flat tire.
But the car is still driving on, and even with a bad tire. And I think that in France, danger is the possibility by the state to use as instrument the fascist group, as well on the electoral question as Le Pen's party, or for the street fighting and making pogrom and racist mob with the more teeny ultra-fascist gang who are ready to fight with feet. And for instance, when the Fifth Republic regime come to the birth, it was after a putsch in which de Gaulle used the fascist and the colonialist forces who want to push the Algerian war to a big to push on the war and to smash and to crush the Algerian people. And de Gaulle took the power. During 3 years, he pushed the war. He military crashed the FLN. The FLN was military defeated, but they don't succeed to defeat politically the people. And then 4 years after taking power, de Gaulle turned his back to the fascists and the colonialists, and he gave independence to Algeria. And at the same time, they were able to have a peaceful transition in Africa with setting up a neo-colonial regime over all the ex-French colony in Africa. And that regime is wonderful. It lasts for 60 years now, and it's working. And well, now it's in crisis, but during 60 years, France was able to have neo-colonial rule over Africa, ex-colony, and it was working for the interest of the capitalists. What could happen? It's the exploitation of crisis, like the horrible murder who happened 15 days ago, where the media, the capitalist reactionary media, and the Marine Le Pen and people, or Eric Zemmour, try to transform the horrors of faits divers into, for instance, getting a urgent parliamentary act to be more tight on migrant people. That's kind of danger we could have. And when you hear to what Darmanin, the interior minister, is saying the last day about that murder, is the same word as Marine Le Pen, and he is in the government of Macron. So the problem for us is the problem of the state and the possibility of the state through the Bonapartism to use violence against the working class and the working people.
Okay, thanks, Olivier. We've got a few minutes left if anybody wants to say anything else. Anybody? Can't see any hands going up. Are we talked out for now? Okay, is there anything else you want to say, Olivier, in conclusion then?
I have one more question on it.
Okay.
I mean, there is the rise of fascism in internationally, as everyone has pointed out here, that's contributed to the discussion. The question is what is the working class and the unions doing about it? And as we've discussed before, in the United States, the union bureaucracy is relying on the Democrats, getting Democrats elected to deal with the rise of fascism. They don't want a discussion in the labor movement, the unions, about a united front against fascism and organizing and mobilizing the working class to fight the rise of the fascist movement and the threat of fascist attacks. There was just an attempted assassination of Pelosi in San Francisco. But, you know, there are going to be assassinations of leftists and not just capitalist politicians. That's coming in the United States. Nothing can stop it, this rise of fascism. And the question is, in France and on an international level, what is the working class doing to organize, prepare to fight against the rise of fascism? That's the decisive question. What is happening in France with the rise of fascism and the fact that the government, as you say, is mouthing the same positions as the fascists? Are the unions organizing? Is there any political campaign? Are there meetings? Is there education campaign? Politically, what's happening in the working class and the organized working class on the left to build a united front against fascism?
Okay, thanks, Steve. I mean, as Roger says, we have wandered quite a long way from the original topic here. We are going to have further meetings on this. Does anybody want to make any comments, any further comments on that? I'm going to return to Olivier again and ask him if he wants to just make some closing comments to the discussion. No? No, okay, Olivier.
So I will answer to the last speech.
I think you're the last speaker now, yeah.
The speaker. For instance, in France, the top union leadership is trapped in the social partnership. And at the same time, they are able to have speech about the need to be friend, not to be racist, and not to be homophobe, and not to be. You can have the front face of the union leadership who said we are not racist, we are not sexist, we are not. But at the same time, what is weakening the movement is that they are trapped inside the collaboration through the social dialogue and the social partnership. And the first issue for us is to put people in movement for the interest, for the material interest, by the way of strike action, union mobilization, and all the kind of mobilization we need to change the world. And if we can break the leadership, the traditional leadership, by the development of mobilization and setting the goal of political power, that will be the way to win.
Okay. Right, thanks very much, Olivier. Thanks very much for leading off on the discussions there. Thank you to everybody who participated in the discussion. It's obviously going to trigger off a whole series of new meetings on all the various topics we strayed into today, which essentially really is about the really frightening move to the right in the world. So that's the end of the discussion now. I'm just going to return to Roger now, who probably will have something to say about next week's meeting.
It follows on very smoothly from the discussion today. It is, as I indicated before, we're going to have some Brazilian comrades speaking next week on the results of the presidential election. So I hope everybody will come and contribute.
Okay, thanks very much, Roger. Well, sorry, Karen, did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say see you next week.
Yes. So thank you all for your attendance.
Okay,
Hope to see you same time next week. Well, hopefully we'll all know what time it is. We'll all have our time sorted out.
I'm flummoxed.
All right. Thanks very much, comrades. Good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.